to affordable housing. We also have a body cam workshop that follows. And as I mentioned on Friday, for the affordable housing workshop, staff has a very brief presentation that will mainly give some general info regarding affordable housing trust funds, and will also kind of highlight some of the initiatives that the City Commission has taken to date for affordable housing, and update you on that. The real emphasis behind the workshop this morning, though, was to allow the Commission an opportunity to have discussion amongst one another in regards to affordable housing. So with that said, and also I can see the mayor has joined us now. So Mr. Mayor, before I yield to Teresa Mayo for presentation, Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments?
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for being late. This has been an important subject for all of us, and I know that that doesn't wane, and I am so grateful for the passion that this commission has and our staff, and I underline that hard, for affordable housing, and the continuing growth that we need to make despite all of the restrictions that are in place. As we take a look at this, and I have not seen this presentation yet, but in which I anticipate one of the subjects, as we know, Peace has requested us to do, is consider a trust fund. We're open to seeing if that is a feasible way to accelerate what we accomplish. And so the nature of our time together is really to look at what we are doing, what is possible, and are there some accelerating ways to move forward. And so thank you so much for the presentation by Teresa on this. We really appreciate it a great deal.
All right, well, thank you and good morning. I'm going to start off with a definition of what a housing trust fund is, since that is the focus of what I have to present today. And the information that I'm going to present has been compiled primarily from the website for an organization called the Housing Trust Fund Project, and also through an interview that the staff in the city manager's office and the mayor had conducted with Michael Anderson, who's the director of that organization, last July. So by definition, you can see it. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
There is on your screen share a double screen image. You might double take and take a look.
Okay.
And just go. It shows the login for also for GoToMeeting.
Let me see if I can change that. You got it now? Perfect. All right. Let me advance the slide here. All right. So here's their very detailed definition, but essentially a housing trust fund is established by an elected government body, either at the city, county, or state level, where a source of public revenue is dedicated either by ordinance, law, or and to a distinct fund with the express and limited purpose of providing affordable housing. Housing trust funds can also be a repository for private donations. However, they are not public-private partnerships, and they are not endowed funds operating from interest and or other earnings. The purpose really is to allow for a governmental entity to match their priorities with the funding source, and then also to be predictable and provide assurance that there are funds available for the stated intent of affordable housing. Housing trust funds are not something new to the state of Florida, and you can see at the state level, the Sadowski funds, which we are all familiar with, are essentially a housing trust fund. There are counties within the state that have established housing trust funds. Dade, Hillsborough, and Pinellas are the closest ones. The only city with a housing trust fund that was identified on the website of the organization is Key West. Looking at our closest neighbor, Hillsborough County, they did establish an affordable housing trust fund with a $10 million a year operation. That was all from general funds, and really was general funds that were freed up by the creation of a transportation tax fund, which totals somewhere in the $470 million range. So with that tax fund, they were then allowed or able to utilize some of more general fund to establish this housing trust fund. In that particular case, it was a campaign that took over 6 years to develop the trust fund and 2 years of vetting by county staff. Last year, they packaged together $20 million, including their trust fund and then federal and state monies to build new multifamily housing complexes and to rehabilitate existing ones. So I think what's key with that example is just to note that it's not something that happens immediately when a jurisdiction or a governmental entity decides to create one of these trust funds. It does take time and consideration because, as Mr. Anderson, who's the director of the Housing Trust Fund project, had indicated to us, you really do want to get the details right to make sure it's something that's sustainable going forward. Mr. Anderson, had identified some challenges with trust funds in Florida. One of those challenges is just state regulatory controls and how local governments are able to, create special funds and appropriate those funds. Another challenge, sorry, I didn't advance the slide here, is the existence of the state housing fund, the Sadowski Fund. So there's a perception by many that these doc stamps that fund that trust fund are collected at the local level already. And so there's already a local contribution to creating that trust fund. There's also some concern by the Florida Housing Finance Corporation that creating additional trust funds at the city and county level does create confusion as to the source of the funding. And then finally, Mr. Anderson had identified that the location and desirability of Florida also creates a challenge in terms of property values and everyone wanting to live here and not wanting to add on extra assessments or taxes or things like that to create these funds. A housing trust fund basically has three key components. The first is the administrative portion. So that is how the local government is going to administer the funds and make awards, and the process by which proposals will be solicited and awarded, reporting and oversight mechanisms, things like that. The second component are programmatic elements. So that is what types of activities are going to be funded, who would be eligible for funding, and the populations that would benefit. So for example, would there be a limit on income levels for units that would be created using these funds? And then finally, and perhaps the most important component, is the revenue source. So how is this going to be funded? And with each element, again, they work collaboratively. You can't just look at one without putting focus on the other. So if you don't know what those programmatic elements are, then having a revenue source becomes kind of pointless if you don't know where exactly you want to direct those funds to. And likewise, if you don't have a revenue source, well, then you're not going to be able to carry out the programmatic elements. And so I think, really in your discussion, what the focus should be are these components, and primarily the programmatic side of it. So do you want to limit any funds made available for a particular population, and again, based on incomes? Do you want that to be at a certain income level? And then also the amount and the source of the revenue. So currently you're appropriating $250,000 annually. So essentially that's more or less a trust fund. It just hasn't been designated by ordinance to be set aside for that specific purpose. And then do you want that $250,000 to increase, or do you want it to serve a particular population? So those are some of the things that you would want to talk about and give some direction on as we look at whether or not to create a housing trust fund. And then just to kind of summarize by what you've been able to achieve with that $250,000 annual appropriation. This again are the projects that have benefited either from the $250,000 directly or from some of our state and federal grant funds or in-kind donations, the land bank. So all in total, there's about 486 units over the past couple of years at varying income levels that have been developed as a result of a combination of using the $250,000 to leverage the state and federal grants, and then also your contribution of land and other in-kind donations to the program. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about housing trust funds generally or how we've used the existing funds to this point.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you, Teresa. I'd like to first address the administrative element. Would this trust fund be administered by the Community Development Department, like Annie and that group would?
Yes, most likely that would be the logical group
Right.
to manage the funds. Yes.
And is the administrative element significant enough for the city manager to have to consider additional staff, or do you see this folding in pretty easily?
I would think that it could be folded in relatively easy given the existing staffing levels. So, to date, what we've done with the $250,000 and the other funds is issue, what we call a request for applications. So we've put out a call for developers to submit to us different projects that they're working on. So I think it would be a matter of just maintaining that same process, but increasing, if there is an increase in the dollar amount, what those funds are, and then being more specific in any request for applications if there is a limit on income levels. So right now, that cap is at 80% to 120% of AMI, area median income.
And then secondly, if you put on one end of the spectrum market-based housing and the other end of the spectrum public housing under the Lakeland Housing Authority, do you think that this fund affordable housing, does that fill the gap between those two? Is that the purpose?
The purpose and why this trust fund mechanism was suggested to us was to help fill that gap. So yes, to obtain more units, but in the case of those who have been advocating for it, there's a desire to have it be more units for those at the very low income level, so at 50% AMI or less.
But public housing, so would people eligible for affordable housing and not be eligible for public housing?
So they could be eligible for these rental units if they qualify at the income levels and or for assistance for home purchase. With the public housing, the Lakeland Housing Authority developments, those are likewise income-based, and then the Housing Authority also has the ability to utilize those Section 8 vouchers. And so those vouchers allow individuals to be able to pay for their rent either, at one of the Housing Authority developments or at another development that would have Section 8 units designated.
I understand how that works, but I'm asking, is there a boundary between eligibility for public housing and eligibility for affordable housing?
They are essentially one and the same.
Okay.
So if we're looking at being able to provide units to fill the deficit in Lakeland, that would be done in combination with our programs to increase and encourage the number of units that are developed, and then also with the Lakeland Housing Authority's communities that they are building. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Teresa, can you tell me the programs we currently run for housing, just as a reminder? And then what are some examples of some programming that would come through a trust fund?
Sure. So we have both, again, federal and state funds that we accept every year when they're appropriated. Those have remained relatively stable the past couple of years, not significant increases. And as you recall, last year with the Stowski funds, there were no funds that were appropriated to the local governments. So with those funds, our housing office maintains two primary programs, and that's the Rehabilitation Assistance for income qualified homeowners. So that's funds to allow them to make improvements to their homes. And then there is a home purchase assistance program where down payment assistance is provided to, again, income qualified home buyers. The more recent programs that the housing office has been administering has been the infill lot program, where the city properties have been made available to builders, developers to purchase those lots, develop and build single family homes on the properties, and then sell those to income qualified buyers. And they can do that one of two ways, either independent of the city's down payment assistance or utilizing the city's down payment assistance. So that's dependent upon whether or not the home buyers can qualify for financing outside of using the city's down payment assistance program. And then we have, with the $250,000 appropriation, the city appropriation, used that together with federal funds to make available funding for multifamily developments that are, again, income-based projects that are coming in. I know I'm probably missing something, but those are the largest things that they've been administering. And then, COVID funds more recently in the past 12 months. And then
so
to the question.
To the second, so yes, thank you for that reminder.
Yes.
And that's where I kind of like the second question too, of what is it, what are some other things that we could do if there was a trust fund, other programs?
So if there was a trust fund and there was again, that dedicated source that's not going to be used for anything else, I think that gives assurance to some in the community that this will be a consistent funding source to not only do what's been done over the past couple of years, but potentially with additional funding to result in additional units more quickly. So I know there's, that magic number out there of 500 units and at the very low income levels. So, it's, again, what is the commission's focus? So if you want to realize just additional units in general, then that would be one way to do it, is through the Housing Trust Fund. And then if you want to specify who would be served by those dollars, that would be another component to that trust fund that you could incorporate.
I think primarily one of the reasons that it has been important for Peace to raise the issue is that we have to work with public-private partners and match what their capacity and grants are with what is affordable for them to build and hold over a period of time. And that doesn't always give the full AMI mix that Peace would love to see us maintain, specifically that if we were running the money through a trust fund, would have been specifically assigned in the programmatic elements that Ms. Maya was talking about. And so, but it also would assume that there was more money available to do that than we're already doing with the $250,000 that has helped to create the 486 units. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. And I had some similar thoughts. Teresa, I do think it's telling that they're the only municipality in Florida to have a trust fund is Key West. Are the counties that have those, are they working with their municipalities on projects, or is it in unincorporated Hillsborough County? I mean, are they working with the cities for the programs?
Yes, so the Hillsborough County example, I do know that was used for some communities within the city limits of definitely Tampa. I don't know if it extended to Temple Terrace at all beyond the city of Tampa limits, but yes, it was basically utilized countywide.
Okay. And then following up with what you were saying about the way we approach the funding now, it essentially acts as an affordable housing trust fund. Is there anything that we can't do now in terms of criteria, requirements that the trust fund, other than having that guaranteed revenue source? I get that, but I still see it as you could achieve the same thing in theory. It's just the mechanisms are different.
Exactly. And so it's really being able to state a purpose for those funds, and again, what income levels you want to serve. The $250,000 does act as a trust fund. It's a dedicated source. I think the concern is being able to maintain a source with some certainty through an extended period of time, rather than having to wait on an annual basis for the budget process and see if it gets picked up again in that process.
Thank you.
Commissioner McLeod, we'd have to also match up P3's interests, because of course our $250,000 wouldn't adequately supply the ability to do any particular project. Any thoughts in that regard from your standpoint?
Mine or Teresa's?
Yours.
Sure. Well, I wonder if that would be the same with a trust fund. I'm not sure the funding would be sufficient to just fund projects without partners coming alongside. If I'm wrong there, Teresa, certainly, how would that work? I would still see those limitations being in place if we're supplementing efforts through the trust fund.
Yes, so that's correct. So again, the way that the Housing Trust Fund group defines these, it's all public funds, but it doesn't preclude you from leveraging those to obtain private funds. But the real goal is to make this a local government or a governmental commitment to funding.
Commissioner Walker.
I was wondering, did you see me, Mr. Mayor? I was thinking, I got my light on. Did they see me or not?
That was the first time I saw you. I apologize.
Yeah, I was wondering. I thought maybe my light's not bright enough over here that it was given to me so you could make sure you see me. But outside of what's already been asked, and thank you again, Mr. Mayor, outside of what have already been asked, Ms. Teresa, I'm aligning myself somewhat with what I heard Commissioner McLeod is saying. What we're doing now, if I heard you correctly, and how we're doing is somewhat similar to what I guess a housing, trust fund, affordable housing trust fund would be. We just don't, I guess, have the designated, or do we have the designated administrative elements that's needed? Because I guess what we have going right now for the $250,000, and then secondly, revenue-wise, if we should venture to something like this and have private donors dollars to come into a mix, will we have to have anything different than what we got right now?
For obtaining additional funds outside of city funds, you wouldn't need a housing trust fund, I don't believe, to accomplish that. And I would have to defer to Mr. Brozart on how that would look as far as financials and how that would be structured as an account. And you're correct in that, yes, the only thing lacking, again, is that programmatic piece and giving specifics as to how you want the funds to be spent, other than saying for, affordable housing units. So the staff up until this point has really kind of had some discretion as to how those funds are being put out there for use. However, they're coming to you now at this point and saying, here's how we're going to do it, and do you concur with that, and do you approve that approach? So this would be really kind of maybe flipping that around, where you as the commission says, this is how we want the funds to be used for these specific purposes, and then the staff would just follow through on the administration.
Secondly, my last question, if I could, Mr. Mayor. where did the number 600 come from? I've been seeing media coverage saying we have allocated, or we have committed ourselves, I should say, to 600 units versus the 500 I thought that we all agreed upon with the peace organization back, some year and a half, 2 years ago now. So where's the 600 number coming from?
Let me answer that one. We committed to 500. I have said publicly, we'd love to have as many as 600. So the 500 isn't our target, but if we could accelerate and grow faster, our goal is more, not less. But there isn't a commitment to that number. It's just to drive and push to try and accomplish that.
Okay, because I was wondering, I thought it was 500, then when I started seeing some media coverage about 600, I'm thinking, when did we do that? But certainly, as one of the 7, I'm at a point where I believe what we're doing is trying to satisfy and be able to support affordable housing as best we can. And I'm like you, Commissioner McLeod, out of one muni of 412 in our state, why we don't have any others. And we know this state is lacking overall, not only the state, our country, when it comes to affordable housing. So I wonder why, there have not been any other cities or any munis, involved with a affordable housing kind of a trust setup. I would ask, my colleagues, if we think we want to go along this particular way, we have something already established. Maybe we should just do what I'm hearing from staff, Ms. Teresa, and her deliberation saying, establish some kind of what we want, and staff then follow suit. And of course, make it available for revenue sources that other private entities or private individuals, whomever, if we could do it legally, and of course, as it would be, I guess, with Mr. Palmer Davis's direction, to be able to see those dollars of revenue sources from different ones.
Agreed. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. Well, basically, in my opinion, why Key West is basically Monroe County. Key West is Monroe County. It starts at Alsbrada. It basically starts at Key Largo and goes down, and Key West is the biggest city in Monroe County anyway. So, but that's my perspective. That's why Monroe County has one. But so I really consider it Monroe County versus Key West and all. And so I really wouldn't consider that city's answer to address Chad's question. And Teresa, do I understand we have 480 units already then of the 500?
Yes, at various income levels.
Okay. So we're not doing too bad from that standpoint, are we?
No, we are not. Commissioner Sullivan.
Thank you. And I ask my colleagues to forgive me. I have to do some more homework on understanding the issue. I think, like all of you, I favor finding ways to make more affordable housing available. But my question still goes back to the Lakeland Housing Authority. And should we, what appears to me to be building a parallel bureaucracy to do what the Lakeland Housing Authority is already doing with access to federal funds? Shouldn't our focus be on more of a partnership with the Lakeland Housing Authority than trying to do a separate effort? And again, I may be completely off base here. Just coming into it new, that's my first question. Why not more partnerships with Lakeland Housing Authority?
Right. So I would answer that with because just the amount of resources that the Housing Authority has, which are limited, this allows for private developers to take advantage of, and I shouldn't say take advantage, but to utilize the Sadowski funds that are made available to them, and then also the tax credit financing. And those private developers then are able to sometimes more quickly execute some of these projects. So when you look at the table that was provided, for example, of the projects listed there, you know, Providence Reserve, Midtown Lofts, Swan Lake Village, Parker Point, Swan Landing, those are all private developers that are developing those units. The only housing authority project has been the Twin Lakes development. And then you'll see there are some smaller projects that have been developed by just completely drew a blank there, by Habitat. And yeah, the rest is all, you know, city projects.
So, Teresa, you're saying that the city brings to the table access to funding resources that Lakeland Housing Authority cannot?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Commissioner Selvage, if I could help round this out just a bit. When the initial request of Peace was that we would buy 500 affordable housing units, they were interested in those being, and this really became clear in the second year of the process with them, having those be available for single mothers with families that were 50% AMI or less. And whereas we can't be that prescriptive when we're working with developers in doing that. So therefore that drove them to want to advocate for a trust fund where we could be specific about those dollars going that direction, which would be valuable if we had millions and millions of dollars in that fund, or that fund was even earning some interest, you know, as we went along. But that's not the case for us. Our allocation is $250,000. The transportation tax in Hillsborough County allowed for that to occur. Abnormally wouldn't have happened otherwise. And we don't have any prospect for that to be occurring. So in effect, it would appear on a simplistic basis that our $250,000 that we already advocate as a commission satisfies the additional support we want to be able to leverage opportunities to build affordable housing. It's just not as tightly prescriptive. Therefore, because we can't add that programmatic element, as Peace wished we made it. And so it might be an overcomplication of what we need to do with what effectively is what we are wanting to do, which is expand affordable housing with the partners with which we can align and that come along and that want to do it. Maybe not as tightly developed for single family homes as would be desirable, but certainly always working to incorporate that element in as much as possible in every one of those projects that we do.
Thank you, Mayor. That's very, very helpful.
As the Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much, Teresa. I have a couple of points and then a couple of questions. I wanted to just kind of speak to Commissioner Selvage. Certainly brings, you know, a breadth and depth of knowledge to the discussions as having his former experience. But I will say that I don't know if we'd have the traction or the 486 units that we have had it not been for the mayor and really community development department. Nicole, coming from her experience with the CRA and really always being focused on how much money we can leverage with each city CRA dollar with private investment, kind of brought that mindset, in my opinion, to the community development department and to the affordable housing discussion, and found out that if these developers went through the federal dollar process and had city backing and city money, that increased their ranking and their profile, you know, among, you know, a multitudinous applications throughout the state for projects. And I think that we've got at least one project, you know, a year, which is kind of typical for an area to receive like the best that you can possibly get, because we sort of implemented that strategy of saying, you know, how much can our $250,000 build? We've actually had a lot of experience, you know, maybe one house in Lincoln Square, you know, versus using that $250,000 and leveraging it with the millions of dollars by partnering with private investors. So I really applaud our team's effort here. And I know it's not exactly, you know, what the Peace folks would hope for. And it pulls my heartstrings when I see that there are kids homeless throughout Polk County who knows what's happened throughout COVID? Those numbers may have exploded. But I think that you have, to get a voucher, Section 8 voucher, there has to be a unit. And our problem at large is that we've not had units at all. We've had tremendous growth in our area. We don't have enough units for, our, middle income folks, let alone the low income and the very low income. And so in my mind, it was, do we wait until we can accumulate $250,000 at a time from our general fund, maybe put it away in a nest egg and try to get this trust fund rolling? Or do we right away say we are open for business? Anybody who wants to build multifamily with us, we've got money. We'll give you traction with regard to getting your name and your project approved to get the federal and state dollars. We've been advocating to not, raid the Sadowski Fund. I feel like that's making maybe some traction with this governor. And hopefully, after COVID, get that more safely in the hands of affordable housing's reach. But when you think about where we are today, and we're hearing, how 486 units, and I know I would love it, to take care of homeless children and single mothers. But, we also have veterans and the elderly that we've been able to house throughout this process. And when they get a house that's affordable, then that, more units is just more units for all of the people who need affordable housing. And I think that we might not have had any additional units had we not really gotten outside the box and said, okay, Teresa, Nicole, team, we've got to get creative and make these dollars, work as powerfully as they can, as fast as they can. And I just want to say, we're all going to talk to Peace this week, and I know that they'll be disappointed on their regard because they're caring for those homeless children, and I applaud their efforts. And honestly, their talking points are what probably were the impetus, got the bee in the bonnet for this commission to really say, we're going to tackle this issue. How we've tackled it might not have been exactly how they wanted us to tackle it, but I would say that when you look at the proof in the pudding, that we have more units than probably any other city in a short amount of time, because we got experimental and innovative and put these into practice with the infill lots, with the working with the builders. So I just kind of wanted to say that, for my colleague, Commissioner Selvage, that's really, I can't think of another issue that this commission in the last 3 years has tried to strategically tackle with the limited funds, that we have to offer as affordable housing. My question is to my colleagues, one, if we want to collect charitable dollars to add value to that $250,000 pot, in my mind, it's already kind of like a trust fund. I don't know if we can do get the eligibility without the dedicated revenue source and make it a trust fund. But I know Parks and Recreation does that a lot. They set aside projects. Those projects are open to Kiwanis clubs and Rotary clubs to get monies to build parks. So number one, could we use the same kind of strategy that Parks and Rec uses with their parks to get charitable dollars in line with affordable housing? So that's number one. And then number two would be, let me see here. I think, regarding Hillsborough's tax, transportation tax fund, I'm really curious about that. We're having discussions about the hospital lease as a revenue source and, all these discussions about transportation and traffic and growth. What did it take for them to get that transportation tax in place? And, it sounds like the affordable housing is just a piece of that $400 million pie that they receive, but I would be curious to find out more about that. So those are my two questions. One, how do we get charitable dollars? And two, could I have more information on the transportation tax?
So a quick response, there's a mass transit tax request that's been deemed unconstitutional in Hillsborough County, recently imposed it. You may have some traction on that. It's not settled yet, but the state of Florida doesn't like additional taxes, and they don't like, and that's why we've had no gain in even wanting a hospitality tax for something to help develop locally our own community development, especially in the core. So it does. We're precluded today from having a private entity come to us, like Publix did for the parks, and make that kind of a contribution. We need to have a case for it and a definition of what is required. it would not require a trust fund for us to accomplish that. We could accommodate that through our existing system. The balance of that is that if you wanted us, the other option is if we wanted to do more than $250,000, and that we could assign millage increases or something to that portion of the money. But we're trying to do this within what we currently raise in property taxes. And I think to your point, Commissioner Madden, the result in a 3.5-year period to be at 486 units is a pretty stout response to that desire and reflects that we don't have a cumbersome system. Commissioner Walker.
I was just going to mention because, and I'm looking at making sure that what I'm hearing from the majority of my colleagues, it appears that we're favoring the programming that we already have, but how can we make it more plausible for people to be able to bring dollars to the table to support what we currently are doing under the operation that we already have in place. Am I hearing that different? Because that's where, again, I made the comment earlier about, and I thought I heard Commissioner McCauley, now Commissioner Madden, Commissioner McLeod, then Commissioner Madden, and even you, Mayor. So do we, at this point, say, well, we got a majority of us that want to lean that way and keep what we got going, but make it some kind of administrative guideline or element involved to be able to receive additional funding from private sources, so we can continue the operation that we currently have in place? Is that where we are right now? Because I want to make sure that's what I like to talk about.
So if your question is, do we currently support the existing system, recognizing why the trust fund issue was raised so that it could be more programmatic, but recognizing we have to do that with the partners that we find and that it works? And would we be willing to accept and receive private dollars into that same system? I think the answer probably is yes. Do you want to do a thumbs up on that so that we could see? Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Selvage, yes. And Smith, Commissioner Selvage. Okay, so and Commissioner McCarley, can you voice in?
Yes, thumbs up.
Okay, so that's unanimous to continue the path that we're on, recognizing that our empathy with peace is certainly if they can help us raise private dollars, if we can figure out ways to encourage some entities to provide additional private dollars alongside the existing annual budgeted commitment of the city for affordable housing, we will facilitate that. And that might be raised too from some of their churches for that regard, that we could be doing that even in their individual organizations to be a part of the leadership of that. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Madden.
One last question. Teresa, in the count of the 486 units, is Vermont Place, the Talbot House units, is that included in that?
Yes, it is.
Because that's top of mind. That was a charitable organization that approached us rather than a builder or a developer. So, if there is a Habitat for Humanity or another organization that's charitable in nature with regard to affordable housing, it comes to us. That was really creative. We had we were able to give the property. They're able to get, charitable donations, and to invest in the property to get those units, up and running for, the veterans. So I think that, that is kind of the creative work that we've already done that could be enhanced, not even just dollars from charitable organizations, but actual projects. If they have, property, that's been neglected and needs rehabilitation, or if they have empty land and builders that they think, that they could coordinate with. I think that the whole goal is to show as a city, we are dedicated and we are open to partners. And I think that the more hands on deck and the more folks, working together, the more we'll be able to solve this problem.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Will we get a copy of the most recent lay of the land, Ms. Teresa, showing all those 486 units that either have been built or in process of being built or Could we get a copy of that, please?
Absolutely. I will get that to the city manager's office to distribute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, because I think you got a unanimous consent that you have been on a good path and are continuing to do so. And then City Manager Sherrouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Teresa, for the presentation and good discussion. Certainly, this gives us at least some foresight as we move in, to the city commission budget workshops that will come up in April. And so I would like, I'm going to call on Mike Brossart, the finance director. I think it might be helpful for a point to be made based on the current position and what I'm hearing from the city commission about the $250,000 that was budgeted and what at least seems to be an appetite to continue that, and how that I think it's an important point about how that amount of money would equate to a similar program like a trust fund. So, Micah, if you could, please.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Just as I was listening, I was thinking about what's been done in the past, and long before we started, even with the 250, Nicole and her team have been providing between $50,000 and $100,000 a year in affordable housing through the CRAs for quite some time, and just what would that equate to if we had created a trust fund a number of years ago, and say we were invested it in a very safe investment that generated, say, 3%. And that's about $3.3 million set aside generates about $100,000 a year right there. But to carry that a little further, the 250 that you're funding right now through the general fund, and the 250 that the CRAs are providing as well at say a nominal 3% safe rate. That's the equivalent of about $16 million in a trust fund right now, is generating about $500,000 a year. Just order of magnitude as you have discussions in the community. So really it's just a case of what you as a body choose to continue to provide in the community. You really have set aside a great deal of money. So that was it.
And Mike, what was the amount that would have to be in the trust fund to yield the $500,000 a year?
Well, at 3%, just a nominal 3% safe, low risk rate, that's about $16 million. It is generating about $500,000 a year between the CRAs and the general fund.
Mike, thank you so much. That is a brilliant comment, and I'm going to keep that in my notes. Thank you very much for that.
Sure, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Brossart, and great addition.
Thank you, Mike. Like I said, I thought that was a great point to make, because even though we may not be matching the exact program of some that have been suggested, what the commission has the equivalency that the finance director just pointed out, which I think is very important to recognize.
Excellent. Okay, we are finished, I think, unless there's any other comments or questions. Thank you for the preparation of the workshop. We're going to move to the body cam workshop, and why don't we give a 5-minute break for that and start at 10:55. workshop, which has been very, very important to us to discuss. This is an addressing an increasingly desired issue among many in our community. And so we are interested to listen and learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Now, different than the affordable housing workshop that we had a moment ago, the Lakeland Police Department does have a lengthier presentation to go to. I think it's important, obviously, that one of the issues related to body cameras is certainly related to those operational components and considerations. And so there's a lot of that included in the presentation that you're going to see. And so with that, I will call on Chief Garcia and the Lakeland Police Department for presentation.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to share a little bit of the research we've been doing on body-worn cameras and how it would be deployable in our agency with some of the other stuff that we already have in place. Assistant Chief Lehman will be running the slides, so I'll ask him to go to the next slide, please. We wanted to give you just a little bit of what these devices are. They're certainly a small, self-contained unit that is quite man-portable. It's not a hindrance to officers to wear the camera at all. They are fairly ruggedly constructed. They've been out in the field for some time now, so they have gotten stronger and stronger in their product line, and they're able to sustain the rigors of police work out in the field. Thus far, what we're seeing is our largest challenge is storage of the data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the slides. But as we move through, we'll let you know what we'll be talking about: in-car cameras, body-worn cameras. Our CAD is our computer-aided dispatch, and of course our RMS is our records management system as we talk about those terms. Next slide, please, Hans. The number of companies already that are out there, the companies that we're seeing the most in our area that is getting deployed by other agencies that's adopted this is the Axon company and the Coban. Coban particularly important to us because we already have some of their cameras in our vehicles as our in-car cameras, which will become a point later in the presentation. Next slide, please. There's some considerable conversation throughout the police industry about the potential benefits to the cameras. It's a very compound equation on how those benefits come about. I was just reading an article from a professor out in Arizona State that has been one of the leading authorities. Michael White is his name. But it is very dependent on the state of the agency when the cameras are deployed, is the amount of benefit they're seeing out of the cameras. But all of these are potential benefits we could see. Certainly there is a perception that the body-worn camera is a useful tool, and there is some arenas within this profession that they could be useful. They do tend to establish another layer of accountability to the public for the police department. And there is some hope, although the recent research I was referring to says in your biggest value of that is in deploying these in a troubled agency, an agency that probably has a federal dissent decree against it, an agency that has already had a long-standing problem with the community. I'm pleased to tell you, and I hope you know, that's not the community we live in. But be that as it may, it is still a link to accountability to the community. And certainly there is a hope that the presence of the camera would increase not just the officer's professionalism, but the actions of the public that knows they're being recorded. The cameras, just as we use our in-car cameras that we have now can be used to resolve complaints. We have, on occasion, had complaints come forward once the dash camera was played. The complainant understood that their perception may have not have quite been as they remembered it, and those complaints usually go away. So there is value there. We've already spoke of the increased transparency, and it could certainly, over time, identify reoccurring issues within our operational procedures. There is talk that it's a good training tool. You're able to go back and critique the officers on their, not just their interaction with the public, but their tactics as they take on different operations deployed as police officers. But what we do find, as we have for years with the video recording training, is that recording is one-dimensional, and it certainly doesn't take in all the other senses, just the sense of sight most often. So there is some drawbacks, but there is some limited value to that as well. Next slide, please. There's a good article out by the New York Times that uses 3 different scenarios that show what the camera is and what the camera isn't, our human perception versus the video perception. And we had hoped to be able to play at least one of those segments for you today, but I'm not sure if that's translating over to Zoom as well as we thought it would. Assistant Chief Lehman, are you able to play that?
I can try it again, but it wasn't just a second ago. No, it's not.
Well, we'll certainly make this article available to the commission. It is, as I spoke about, it's 3 different scenarios, and it gives you an opportunity to see how drastic that changes depending on the camera angle. This first one is referenced here on the slides. The picture to the left, the young man looks like he's engaged in full combat with someone at the angle of the body cam. But when you go off to the side and look at a recording, actually the officer and the subject is dancing in front of each other. So just a small indication of the perception of cameras and how we have to be aware of that as we move forward in that. But we'll certainly make this entire article available to the commission. Next slide, please. As we have continued with the research, some of the impacts that we're concerned with, some of the challenges we could face is certainly there is a significant increase in the reoccurring annual cost of fielding body cameras. We'll have those numbers for you in slides moving forward. But there is a reoccurring cost, not just the initial cost that we need to be concerned with. We're fortunate that we're already well deployed in the area of in-car videos. And some of the large costs that we've seen with other agencies is because they had no video base at all they were building from. So we are building off of a base, although we're building off of an older system that it itself is already planned to be enhanced as we move forward. And there was already plans in place to enhance that. But we would certainly like to enhance that along with any body-worn camera program that we may deploy. We still have a need for testing and evaluation for the functional operation of the body-worn camera with our in-car camera system. But that is something we can certainly work through with our IT department. We are concerned about the additional public records request, and talking with other agencies, that there will certainly be more because there's more material to request. We're not staffed adequately at the moment to handle that. We only have one person that does that. They stay quite busy now with our 911 dispatch as well as our in-car camera request. And when we say public records, that's not just the public reaching out for records. That's those documents getting shared with the courts that are needed through discovery for these criminal trials to move forward. So there's a considerable amount of work that our one gentleman that's assigned to that does now. there would definitely be some consideration for additional staff moving forward if we develop more records to be requested. Just like with our in-car videos, just like with our 911 communication or anything else we put out, we certainly have to adhere to all the Marcy's Law, the other redaction exemptions that occur with crime victims, with undercover officers, ongoing investigations. There's a litany of a list of things that has to be taken out of any public record before it's shared, if it's protected in that manner. So these will certainly have to be gone through just like the other videos that we do now. As you all well know, we're in the infant stages of a large project here in connection with our IT department, standing up our new CAD and RMS system, which we hope will go live in the spring of 2022. But that is very taxing from our IT standpoint now. Speaking with Robert Steele and Oscar Torres, they have a full plate in getting that implemented now. And that would be the component that would stand the mechanics of the body-worn cameras up as well. So that is definitely a consideration on that side, the actual functioning of machines. Next slide, please. The use of body-worn cameras comes with the responsibility to catalog and tag any cases that the officers work out in the field or any incidents that they think will later be a dispute. That does not seamlessly happen. That's an active part on the officer that will certainly take away from the duties we already have them assigned to. There's depending on the activity of the officer, of course, there would be more cataloging and more tagging that officer would have to do. The impact would be felt more on your more proactive personnel, but that is certainly something that's being worked through, and the ability to do that is becoming easier on the officers as the systems keep developing themselves. Another concern that we have is these have to be docked or charged. That is not just an increased cost to keep the officers out in the field and mobile with a docking station, or you bring them to the station and you lose patrol time out on the road. So there's a trade-off in both directions. We're still weighing that out to determine which would be the best here in our city. We run into the issue of, again, creating a lot of records that have to be transcribed. Our state attorney has certainly came forward and said they are not against body cameras, but they do not have the personnel to take on the extra burden. So if we take that on, we have to deliver a product to them that is ready to be taken to trial. So in full disclosure, that would be another work product that we would have to develop to pass along to our partners at the state attorney's office to make the prosecution of our cases. Of course, with any new program or equipment, there'll be some downtime in the training of personnel to get the equipment out, not just in your police force, but our civilian force that supports the police department that works through these records and files, as well as the IT department will have a piece in this as well. At some point, we will certainly become where we're consolidated with our in-car videos. Any body-worn program we would go to, our interview rooms are also recorded, and all of that comes into a digital records management or digital evidence management system that has to be stood up, held to those same accountable standards to be able to produce those records when requested upon, either by the public or the courts. So we're certainly aware of that and working towards that end. Next slide, please. So our data and how we get here. Last year we ran a little over 102,000 calls, as you can see on your screen. There was 6,200 traffic stops worked, 5,400 plus arrests made. And in all of that, we had 205 uses of force or protective action, as we call, where an officer had to go hands-on with a suspect to gain compliance. From that, we generated 55 external citizen concerns. And when I say concerns, we received calls, and last year it was 55, and that goes to our Office of Professional Standards. And Sergeant Strong, Lieutenant Thompson, and their detectives initially vet those complaints out to see if we have a policy violation. If there is one, then an internal investigation is started. As you can see from those 55, 15 merited a further investigation, and we launched an internal investigation on those. Out of those 15, there was 6 cases that would be what we consider cases of concern to what we would hope body cameras would have an influence on. We had 4 allegations of excessive force from the public and 2 bias-based policing complaints. Those 6 cases, along with the remainder of those 15, were worked, and of those 6, 0 of those were sustained. What that told us was that in 99.93% of the calls our officers ran last year, they ran them without complaint, without citizen complaint. And I don't think I have to tell you, we're a profession that begs for complaints. We have a lobby full of pamphlets that tell you how you can complain on us. Part of our CALEA standards is to offer to the public to come forward with any complaint they have in written form. We have an open dialogue where we open the phone lines every time we're reaccredited. So while I'm sure there's many professions that offer an opportunity for critique and complaint, law enforcement in general, and particularly here at the Lakeland Police Department, has a very robust opportunity for the citizens to interact with us and let us know of any displeasure that they have. 55 people out of 102,000 calls chose to do that last year. Well, talking with staff, I said that could be an anomaly. We're going through the whole COVID thing. Maybe there just wasn't anybody calling, so we went back and we pulled 5 years of historical data. And in those 5 years, as you can see on the screen, we're pretty proud of the men and women of the Lakeland Police Department. They ran those calls 99.9% of the time without any complaint from anyone. Would be willing to guess those are pretty good numbers across the nation. I don't think those are numbers coming out of troubled police departments. But that is the numbers that we have for you today. Of course, you can tell in 2020, the activity was less, and a lot of that had to do with COVID. Our officers were tasked with other jobs. They were all of a sudden the ad hoc park police, they were the ad hoc mass police. So there is less traffic stops, less interactions, but there was still a number of arrests that occurred, a number of opportunities to either have a good interaction or a bad interaction with the public. And last year, as well as the 4 years before that, 99% of the time, we show a good reaction with the public. Next slide, please. Looking at deployment, as we spoke about, this hardware has about a 5-year shelf life on it. So anything we tell you today would be reoccurring every 5 years when you start that. If we stayed with the co-band system that we spoke of at the beginning of this, we already have about 20 of those new vehicles outfitted. That would leave us another 140 to outfit with the co-band in-car video that would work in conjunction with the body camera system. If we went to Axon, which is the other major vendor that you hear talk about, we would have to remove all of them that we have now. And that would put us at about 165 to replace, to have interface with our in-car system and our body-worn system. The other thing, one of the other major concerns we would have with deployment is we would need 2 new staff members to certainly handle the workload of the records requests that we can anticipate would come, as well as the IT work. So we would need an employee upgrade in our public record system, as well as in our IT department to handle not just the workload, but the hardware and the maintenance to keep us functioning. Again, as we've already spoke about, I think it's hugely important that we're already trying to stand up at this time a new CAD and RMS system, and we would hope to be able to interact with any in-car or body-worn system that we stand up in the future. That would certainly cut some of the man hours down, some of the record management system down, if we're able to dovetail CAD and RMS into any body-worn system. Next slide, please. Where we're at currently, before this conversation began, as I spoke about, we're working to upfit the fleet with the new in-car video cameras from Coban that will integrate with the CAD and RMS system. We're at a point where we're having to replace our systems in our interview rooms up in our criminal investigations division, and all those systems work together. And as we've spoke about numerous times now, the implementation of that CAD and RMS system, which is a considerable undertaking for us, not just in hardware, but in training the officers as well to use a new report writing system. In this business, other than an unknown trouble call or domestic violence call, the word of you're getting a new report writing system haunts the officers quite a bit. So we'll work them through that, and we'll certainly get them up and ready to go with this new system. But it will be a challenge to get them trained up. As currently, we're transitioning from our DVD storage into a cloud storage system, which will not only help with in-car dashboard cameras, but certainly any body-worn program we would look at in the future. Again, that's all part of the digital evidence management system. We spoke again about integrating all these systems together. That's hugely important that we're able to integrate them together. And a large portion of that is so you don't have personnel going to several different buckets of information, if you will, to try to retrieve that information. So we have a kind of a click and go at some time in the future where we can pull all this information in together, give it to the entities that need it. As we were scheduled, we were hoping to finish that fleet upgrade with the in-car cameras by FY25. And as I spoke, we're already on track for doing that. And we will continue to implement our digital collection of evidence in our evidence rooms, as well as any video that we have out in the field. Next slide, please. So what we found from the research is the big cost is the storage. The camera itself is, although there is some cost involved in it, that's not your major cost. That's not really your reoccurring cost, other than the every 5 years of re-up into a new camera. But the big concern for us is the storage of that data. And you can see the numbers on the screen. Our IT folks tell us that based on their knowledge of speaking to other agencies, as well as the amount of records we store now with our in-car video, we're probably best suited with this unlimited storage plan. And that would be a little over $500,000 the first year to get started. Now, of course, our new in-car video system will also require an upgrade in our storage as well. But as I spoke about earlier on, the more records we create, the more records we have to retain, the more records we're accountable for. So we'll certainly need a robust system to collect any records that we produce. And any conversation we're having now, of course, we're having it with our current population, with our current police force. We're talking about every 5 years, there's an added cost. I would anticipate there'll be an added population and added officer numbers every 5 years as we move along as well. Next slide, please. These are the numbers for us to get started, as well as maintain our first 5 years and our total in 10 years. And if I may, I would ask Assistant Chief Lehman to walk you through these numbers. That this is quite a bit of research and work on his part, and I want him to deliver that to you, please.
Good morning. Basically, me and Robert Steele with IT and a couple others, we've been working on this past few weeks, and these prices are based on list pricing, and you guys know is once we go out to RFP or anything like that, those can be negotiated, but we're still going to have a huge cost. And if you look at the chart up there, the base costs currently to outfit all our in-car systems, our current in-car systems, which are built into our fleet budget, are about $5,500 an in-car video system, and we get 7 years out of our vehicle usually from fleet. The next line is cloud storage. That's where you get a big hit in your funding. That would be for in-car video, unlimited cloud storage. And it's an additional number on top of cloud storage that would be needed for body cam. We started with, and Chief Garcia mentioned about 140 systems there installing. All our cameras now would, if we went to a new system, or as we're upgrading and we phase it in, either way, we have to remove those old systems and put ones in if we want to keep in-car video and body worn to interface together. And then the rule of thumb we just kind of used here is 200 systems to kind of give you guys a ballpark number. Cameras themselves are $450, $500 each, but it's the monthly maintenance fees and things like that that drive up the costs along with the cloud storage. If every member of the department had a body cam, we're authorized at 253 right now. If we broke that down a little bit into control division and some other units, we started with a number of 200 just as a good round number for some preliminary estimates for pricing. All of our cameras or body worns would need docking stations in the vehicles, as well as we would need some docking stations in the building as well for ones that are loaned out or replacement, or if we have a member that's working an extra duty detail needs to check one out and things like that. You go down a little farther, you've got the dedicated internet service, and then we have 2 additional staff members there for public records and a body worn camera administrator / computer application specialist. Most of the agencies we've talked to, they have a dedicated full-time member that is programming body cams along with in-cars, getting them ready, assigning them to people, making sure they work, sending them off of repair and things of that nature. So when you kind of look at the whole system, there's an initial cost, and then you'll see our annual cost goes down some, but trying to look at it the 5 year, you're looking at 4.5, upwards of 5 million every 5 years. Most all these body worn camera contracts last 5 years, and then want you to re-up with another contract. So if you go to another vendor, you have to find a way to store all your data from the prior vendor. Or if you continue on with the same vendor in year 6, you still have all that storage that builds and builds and builds every year. So this is about the best case scenario pricing we could give you without going into negotiations with folks, but I want to give you at least a ballpark idea of some of the initial costs we think that are going to hit us there in the beginning. So. Chief, do you have anything else on that slide?
Thank you, and you can go to the next one, please. So the 3 different strategies we've looked at so far is replacing our in-car video systems, as we talked about, and adding the body-worn cameras. That would be an implementation of about 1 year, with, as Hans just told you, a cost of about $4.85 million to get started. If we add the body warns to our existing car cameras, as we spoke about, the co-band system, that's 3 to 5 years on the plan that we already had. And that would run us at a cost of about $3 million to pull that off. And staying with just our in-car cameras and upgrading to the cloud system cameras, we're looking at about $1.5 million, and the same about 5 years for that to work its way through the fleet. Next slide, please. And with that, we'll stand for questions. Mr. Salvage, sorry, you're first.
Okay.
Oh, awesome.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Selvage, go ahead. I'm sorry. And then Commissioner Walton, and then Commissioner.
Thank you, Chief and Assistant Chief Lehman. When you identify an officer who used excessive force or exercised poor judgment, describe what your disciplinary and progressive disciplinary steps are.
Yes, sir. First of all, we have an AIM system, an administrative management system, that not only tracks misbehavior in officers, it tracks car crashes, it tracks equipment loss, it tracks anything that would be an indication that there may be some problem with that officer. And we have an early warning system in place. And if that early warning system is triggered, the first it goes to that squad level, and it's addressed by the sergeant and the lieutenant. It is it's sent back up through the chain of command to make sure that it was addressed properly, and they work to find out what those deficiencies are that created that early warning, and they work through that. Depending on the severity of the infraction, it can go straight to an internal investigation, and we have a chart of sanctions that matches up with the violation itself, and the officers are held accountable for their policy violation.
In your experience on the force, Chief, has LPD ever fired somebody for excessive force?
No, sir, not that comes to mind without researching that. We have had employees that had less than termination, reprimand, suspension, retraining, but one does not come to mind that was terminated. For that reason, we have certainly, unfortunately, terminated employees for misconduct.
Sure, sure. And will federal funding be available to help fund these cameras?
Not at the moment. There is grants out there. We've been researching them, trying to find them. Much like the other grants that we see, whether it's drug grants or community policing grants, a lot of times those grants go to the most blighted areas, the areas that are in most need. There's, of course, committees that determine where those grants go and where those monies go.
Okay.
With our data, it would be pretty tough for us to make a plea over other agencies.
Got it. And has the union taken a stance on this at all?
The hallway talk, if you will, sir, they seem to be indifferent to it. They're certainly, their concern is their contract. That they feel like that's a huge looming issue with them, more so than any new equipment of any type.
Got it. And finally, Mayor, I think that the chief and Hans gave a balanced presentation, but I would ask that the commission consider bringing on a presentation asking a reputable company to come in and give us the other side, the argument for cameras. I think it would be illuminating for us to see this, and not to say that the chief didn't give a balanced presentation, but I'd like to hear from the other side too. Thank you.
Commissioner Selvage, just give me a little more direction on that. So if we were looking for that, what kinds of sources are you considering?
Well, I think maybe a city who's already implemented it. There are certainly units or organizations out there who are clearly for this. And I'd want to see a presentation on facts that the other cities have experienced rather than an emotional plea. This is one of those arguments that can be overtaken by emotion. And so let me think about that, Mayor, but I'd like to see or hear the other side a little bit.
Well, I think it's a good, valid thought. So maybe if I'm doing a little tighter framing, and stop me if I'm wrong, probably a Florida department that has implemented and is enthusiastic about. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, I'd like to hear a city that's done it, about our size or larger, and what they've seen. We certainly hear from the media that there are opponents of this. They protect both officers and the public. So yeah, that would be ideal if we could get a city police chief or city manager or mayor to speak to us. That's my recommendation.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one of my questions is already answered by the question that Commissioner Savage raised about any federal funding, but I heard you mention, Chief, there's a grant funding maybe that's there, but we may be not qualified because of some of the statistics and data that you've shown us that may not help us as far as being of support to get even grant funding. So my question would be, why do you believe, we have the Concerned Citizens Group, we have the NAACP, Lakeland Branch, asking that we pursue the body camera situation, but then we look at your data that you provided us, even for the past 5 years, there's statistics that show that we have not had the kind of concerns here locally that maybe some other communities, other cities in our country, or even maybe here in the state of Florida have endured. And one I can especially refer to is probably because I have family that lives in that particular city, and I hear a lot of the challenges they're faced with, and that's the city of St. Petersburg. So what is it? Is it because, here of late, because of everything we was challenged with this past summer with the marches, the rioting, of course, what we may have been some poor incidents that happened with fatalities, deaths, murders, homicide with people and police department being involved in the situation, a particular officers. So what is it, that want to continue to raise this head of needing to invest in a particular mechanism to show or be able to have more profound evidence that officer have done the right thing or did not do the right thing? I know we have that, as you mentioned, the Coben product that's there. And I think in one of your slides you showed a lesser cost if we did something with that and advance it to the BC, what is it called? BWC, is that right? No, BCW. I think I got it right. So what is it? I mean, I sit here and think, well, we got these statistics that's showing we don't have those kind of challenges. Why is the push being so evident here in our community?
Well, sir, I would certainly not dispute the perception of other folks. I think a lot of that conversation is on a national level. I think we've seen a lot on a national level that there are police departments that need reform. Certainly, we've seen it through body-worn cameras because a lot of these agencies that are the poor poster child for bad policing are already wearing body-worn cameras. That's how we know that. We're seeing it through body-worn cameras. So that certainly gives me some pause of how effective they are. We have dash cameras that are reviewed monthly by our supervisors that looks for stuff like excessive force or bias-based policing or misconduct on a traffic stop. As I spoke about earlier, we have pamphlets in our lobby. Part of our CALIA certification is asking the public to come forward. We have a lot of interaction with the public. We have a very robust PAL program here, I think, that makes a lot of headway. I think our neighborhood liaison officers are working weight in gold out in the community. So we do a lot of stuff that some of these other police departments aren't doing. And that's not unusual, and that's not just unique to this conversation. We send our guys and gals off the training all the time, and they come back and say they already were getting the best training here in the Southeast, that they didn't need to go up to the Northeast or out West to learn something. They went out there and taught when they were supposed to be a student because we're already ahead of the game down here. That's not to say that there's not improvement. We can all improve, and we certainly strive to improve our contacts with the community every day. But I believe we're doing a lot of stuff right here. And when I ask for those incidents that our officers were involved, not just the police in general, I don't get many responses. I get a lot of stories about the police, and I find out that's in Atlanta, or I find out that's in Missouri, or I find out that's in New York. But when I ask about our police, I just don't hear those stories.
But would you agree that we still have, as you just mentioned, challenges here in our community where we do find individuals of color that still may have that problem where they get pulled over or get stopped or get whatever it is and have to account for versus someone else? And would you not agree to that at all?
Yes, sir. I certainly believe that happens. I can certainly tell you that I've had that happen. I've drove my vehicle down corridors that are known for Hispanic drug trafficking, and I've been the recipient of a few of those stops. And I understood why that was happening, and I thank the officer for doing his job. And I sat quietly in my vehicle with my hands where they could be seen, produced my proper driver's license, and we had no issue on that stop. A lot of the interactions we see is bad interaction, bad human interaction. It doesn't matter what equipment we put in that car. If we don't teach our people to properly interact as human beings with one another, we're going to have issues, whether we're wearing cameras or not. So we certainly have to invest more in our human capital. I agree with that 100%.
One last question about me, Mr. Mayor. Go to the chart that showed that the breakdown. I think you had 1, 2, 3, and I was talking about number 2. I think it was just about part of my first question when it came to the CADS, CADS equipment versus integrating that with BWC. Am I saying that right? Number 2, yes, that's what it was. Could you explain that one a little better? That add the BWC to existing. That's ICV. Is that the dash cameras?
Yeah, yes, sir. The ICV is in-car video.
Yeah, that's the dash cameras, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And is that considered in relationship to the CADS? You understand my question?
I think you said talking about how does it integrate to the computer system.
Yeah.
Yes, we're hopeful that we'll be able to integrate any and all of these systems into our new report writer into our new RMS system and CAD system.
Okay. But number two, again, is how you can add the BWC body-worn cameras to the existing, I call dash cam situation, and the implementation will be 3 to 5 years, and the cost will be about, over a 5-year period, $3 million. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Reed and then Commissioner Madden.
Thank you. Ruben, are there any other law enforcement agencies in Polk County that have used body cameras?
No, sir. Lake Wells has just made recommendation to start a pilot program with 6 or 8 cameras, I believe.
It's just Tampa. Probably the closest one is Tampa. Tampa has them, doesn't he?
Tampa has begun to outfit some of their units with them. Yes, sir.
I was going to be a little facetious to ask you what the bad parts were about this, but I'll reserve that for later. But again, thanks for the information.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you both chiefs for this great presentation today. I've a couple of thoughts and then a question. When it comes to body cameras, I think that, for policymakers and for the city of Lakeland to consider this going forward into the future, it's my personal opinion that it's, out of a nature to be proactive, like the city of Lakeland has always been, with regard to best practices, with regard to innovation, coming into 2020 and beyond, more like a smart city application, using, the best and brightest technology going forward. And so I know that, of course, the conversation today is more of a reactive result, based on what happened in 2020 with our conversations with Lakeland, and just to really want to be sensitive, to what happened with George Floyd. And certainly that's the number one reason, I think, for this commission to really want to bring this issue up and have this conversation today. I think that where we go from here, now that we've seen the considerable costs that this would take, really needs to have more of a visionary approach than just a reactive approach. So I would suggest and add to my colleague, Commissioner Selvage, that not just having a Florida city or county, I really look to Nikki Haley's example after the shooting there, when she went about the body camera deployment in her state. I would really like to see how she did that, how the cities and counties cooperated with that initiative, if it's been successful. Because one of the things that we found in the pandemic is that it's great for City of Lakeland to go do something, whether it's a mask mandate or some other mitigation strategy for the virus. But if we don't have cooperation or collaboration with our colleagues in the county and throughout the state, it makes it difficult for enforcement, makes it difficult for any kind of certainty for visitors and folks, in Florida. So I'm not opposed to hearing from a city or a county in Florida, but I really am particularly interested in a state like South Carolina under Nikki Haley's leadership when she deployed those, to see what they found for a mass deployment and how that was received and how they feel it's gone over. And then, finding out if it's been a great success and knowing we're going into more Internet of Things and smart city applications across the board, I think that then putting the way we do policing in that light, more of a best practice and innovation strategy than just a reactive, because I certainly am not at the table today because I feel like we've been a worse offender. And I certainly want to commend the chiefs and the leadership for their sterling example that they showcased today. Not that we're above reproach or that we're perfect, but some of those things that you mentioned are because we're proactive, because we have the best equipment, because we have the training. And so is body cameras going to be one of those things, the tools in the tool chest of the cities who are proactive and innovative, not just those who are responding to public outcry because of a bad Apple scenario. So that's kind of, I just wanted to say, like, as for me, 1 of 7, I kind of wanted to think of it as number 1, as a smart city approach and best practice. And if we think that is, then that's something that we invest in, just like we started investing in fiber so many years ago. And now we have a lot of robust backbone for us to do other smart city things, is our body cameras in that tool chest of just, that will be in 10 years from now what everyone's doing, because that's where technology is going. And then also, if so, we need kind of an approach from a statewide approach, someone like South Carolina and how they address that. I think that really my question is, that's just kind of how, my observations and feelings about the conversation today. I do feel if we're going into the budget process and whether or not we can invest or put the funds aside, or certainly the chief mentioned doing this simultaneous with the other IT developments, that makes me feel, gives me pause that we would be that nimble to integrate this, and have it coincide with the 22 live date of the other IT improvements. Not that I'm opposed to it, it just, in my world with COVID and our funds, I can't imagine how we can come up with those funds in that time to do that in tandem. And also the other pause is with the union contract. Our chief's comment that really their contract is more important right now than new equipment. And I feel like they've been on the back burner for the last couple of years, and certainly no one across the board was able to get any kind of raises in pay, with the city and COVID. But I don't want to be derelict in our duty to just have that conversation with the union and the current officers, employees first, before I would start to dedicate funds in a significant way. I need to know that our current force feels adequately provided for before we start to allocate funds, towards this long-term SMART initiative.
Commissioner Selvage, and then McLeod, and then McCarley.
Thank you, Mayor. I like what Commissioner Madden said about maybe bringing in a statewide representative. I mean, you brought in South Carolina. We could get input on what's happened at rural to large cities. So I said the other side. What I really meant to say, let's have somebody come in who's been through this and can tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I think she's right on with how we should approach it next. Thank you.
I see Hans' pen at work, so he's got you down. All right, and then so who did I say was next? It's Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief and Assistant Chief Lehman. Chief Garcia, if costs and resources were not a factor, and I know those are big issues, but if they weren't, how would that make you more likely to adopt body cameras as a tool? Would you just think, well, if there's no cost, we can do this, it's a good thing to have? I'm just curious, just trying to get at the core of body cameras as an operational tool.
Yes, certainly. If the state, as they have in South Carolina, has put money across the board to put cameras on all officers, then we would certainly get in line and march with the rest of the troops. It's just our job to tell you what the data is and what our research has found, not necessarily to champion one way or the other, but just to provide the information for a logical decision.
Sure. Thank you. No, and that's important. Those numbers, we want to see those. And I appreciate the way, I think you've brought a very balanced perspective to this. So certainly appreciate the effort you all put into getting here today, and just your willingness to absorb community feedback, because I think I've seen that in my short time on the commission. You were very willing to hear and to listen, and it's not always easy when you have people outside of the profession who say, you need to do this, you need to do that. And you just, I think you handle it very well with a lot of grace. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Guys, totally concurrent. By the way, that the calls for service to the 6 incidents is phenomenal performance. And I know all of us thought that when we saw it. We haven't said that yet. Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chiefs. I really appreciate, too, all the data that you brought forward, and especially kudos to you all for those success rates, because I think that's important for our community to hear at large. When we hear these national stories, sometimes we think that's going on in our hometown, and that's not always the case. So I really appreciate you taking so much time and doing this. I had a question and a statement. I'll ask my question first, and then I'll follow up with a statement if that's okay. But if we piloted this and did it in a small form, where would you all start, or what would you recommend being a pilot idea for our police department?
We've discussed that. It would almost be like picking which officers we would give ballistic vests to. We just can't determine, which officer would need that. There's an old adage, survival adage in police work: either get all the way in or get all the way out. And I feel if we get in, we should get all the way in, because we can't pick which officer is going to get involved in that incident. We have 4 squads that run it. We implement one squad. Just by sheer luck, it's going to be somebody on one of those other 3 squads that get involved in a national incident that we're going to want to see that footage of. And then we're going to have a public that thinks we have that ability, and we don't. So my recommendation would be to get all the way in if we get in.
I completely respect that. Thank you for sharing. Because my knee jerk was more about, obviously, in schools with SROs, and if we had footage of that, but then I think you probably run into some liability issues with minors if SROs are cameraed. But one of the things, I had a meeting last week where I was speaking to someone from the school district who in Winter Haven has really encouraged, one of the schools in Winter Haven has a day where their police department and their police department, as well as their fire department, sends in mentors to eat lunch for free in one of the middle schools over in that area, where they're building that community support of the police department and of public service and the fire department. I know you all do a lot of outreach, but to me, part of this dialogue includes, how are we affecting young people? How are we showing young people that police are here to help them? Because I think that's one of the ways that will be preventative in the long run. And I know you all are already doing that, so you don't have to comment on it if you don't want to, but I just feel like this is reactionary, as was stated earlier. I'm sure there is a helpful approach in this, but I also feel like our community police really work hard to be seen in the communities at large in a positive way, and that they're working really diligently to do that, to mentor young people and also be recognized as the helpers in a community and not the hinderers. So I just want to thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I agree with that, Commissioner McCarley, and I think it is an example of, this is a system where uniformity matters, and also where we recognize it does not only provide a long-term, maybe smart approach if implemented, but it also is protective for those officers, just as it is protective for the citizen in terms of what really happened. And so some of that growing accountability piece works very much on a two-way basis. Commissioner Walker.
Let me share, if I could, Mr. Mayor and my colleagues. We have to remember, and I doubt that you maybe do not remember, or do not have some thought, but you have that, those communities that do feel, they're not, something is always wrong, or something going wrong. And that's why I think we do applaud our police department here locally as to what they're doing to support, showing that we have the right kind of things in place, when it comes to community policing. Several years back, we didn't have it, and it had gotten put on the shelf, for lack of better words, because of funding. And then, of course, during my some years back, again, Commissioner Salvage is part of this as well, we voted as a commission to bring back, community policing, which had not been in our city for, I forget how many years it might have been. Of course, Chief, those years and can comment to that particular information. But we have to remember now, when you start seeing things or hearing things, and you got communities that may feel that it's not the right kind of things that's being done, we got to do more. And I'm not saying we aren't, because I'm out there. I see PAL. I see, the neighborhood officers, liaison officers. I see community policing happening for our city. And I think that's why we have the data that prove, that we don't have the kind of occurrences that many of the other cities are having. But I had to take a little break, and I'm sorry at the time when I heard my dear colleague, Commissioner Madden, talking about bringing someone in. But if we're going to bring that someone in, and I'm sure she might have said this, and if I said something incorrect, please forgive me. But I'd like to hear from someone who have been there, done that as well, but have had some challenges in those particular communities or in that city or town, that may have experienced, situations such as was warranted, going to the BWC approach. Again, I think what we're doing here have been proven that we don't have those kind of challenges that some of the other cities have. I say that all the time, and I will continue to say it unless I see it different, but I don't see it different as of today. But I think, too, we have to embrace the communities that still feel that there's some problem somewhere, and maybe to share as best we can the data that we just saw. I've never seen this data before tonight. I thank God we got it. But how can we get it out to those who, still may feel there's a problem? So they can hear it, not only hear, but see it and be shown these statistics. And that's why we don't have as much of a problem, not saying as as Chief has already said, and I would say still there's some things that we need to work on to make it better. But we got to get it out there so people who still say, as a concerned citizens group may say, or as the Lakeland branch of the NAACP may say, or others may say, hey, we don't have the challenge that we know that some other communities are having, and maybe that's why we're, taking this approach, even as Commissioner McConnell said already, a testing ground first before we go full blown, or if that even can be done. And I hear you, Chief, saying you would not want certain ones to be, being selected. You rather go full blown.
Hey, sir. Any other comments from commissioners? All right, I'd like to make a suggestion then, based on what we have heard, and also that it's 11:58. We'd probably like to do a second round on this workshop within maybe the next 60 days, 30 to 60 days. Okay, good. And some things to consider in that are the South Carolina's success or bumps, and another department, which I think Assistant Chief Lehman has gotten. Why I have some that I'd like to add. Why does it take 5 years to implement an ICV program over the vehicles? What are the biggest differences between the Coban and the Axon systems, so that if there was a motivation to bump off the ones that are already have been deployed in the vehicles on the ICV, why would we want to do that? What are we gaining on the BCWs and less its cost? Are there any optional things in this? So, for example, I saw the in-car download as one of the cost factors. Is that something you have to do up front? Although what would be good about that is that every car would be able to dump its body camera in as soon as possible. And I can see that as certainly a tactical reason to want that. And are there, if we were doing some phasing, what would that phasing in look like? So if we were trying to spread these costs maybe over 2 years, or do you do all the body cam implementation all at once and the ICVs, the phasing? And then finally, the last thing that I have on my list is, of those three options, what is the really prudent thing to do if you were going to do it irrespective of the money? What would you do to set the system up the right way if you were saying, as Commissioner Madden was suggesting, on a smart city long-term basis, this is the way we'd want to orchestrate it, so that we'd have a sense and feeling of that direction, whether or not we should pull some plugs now because it'd be the most cost-effective time to do so. I would add to this, certainly from my perspective, and I believe the commission's as well, we have great respect for LPD. We have great respect for the accomplishments that we see they have attained in those last 4 years, just looking from 2016 on in those numbers. That's extremely commendable. And Commissioner Madden commented on the pay. I really would love to see that contract get done from everybody's standpoint so that we can move on well together. And we want to be a commission that continues to come alongside LPD. This is a commission that has great respect for LPD. So it's nice to see, nice to get that behind us. Commissioner Walker.
But while we're still having a discussion, Mr. Mayor, again, I would say we need to get the statistics out to the community. Lakeland needs to see these numbers. You know, we're seeing it for the first time in some respect. You know, we all have our conversations with Chief Garcia and the senior staff about situations as such. But we got to get this information out so people can see it and know, you know, the challenges that you may see or have here, or you hear, or you talk about in your home or in your community. These statistics does not prove that we have the kind of problems. I think it's got to be shared. We need to share it. And I got one quick question for you, Chief Garcia, before I guess we wind up here. Tell me, for the dash cameras, how far reach is that? Is feet, yards? How far does it reach as a motor vehicle? The vehicle is stopped, and something happens. How far out does it capture a particular incident in footage at best?
It would certainly be in relationship to where the offender's vehicle is stopped and the officer's vehicle is stopped, but it goes out in a cone. I would estimate about a 45-degree cone out to the front of the vehicle. If the motorist stays in the vehicle, everything is captured. If the motorist chooses to jump and run from the vehicle, we encounter some problems. We'd still have audio, but we wouldn't have video. But again, if we get cooperation, it's certainly the goal that we're all seeking, and we stay in the confines of the car or where the officer would have the motorist step out next to the car, all that is already captured on camera with the equipment we have.
All right.
My next question, if I could, Mr. Mayor. NLOs, the neighborhood liaison officers that are out in the communities, and we see them have interaction as they are. Well, I guess I'm trying to make sure I pose my question correctly. How best can that be shared too with other citizens about this particular operation, and making sure they understand that they're there? They're making sure they're and I think we do make sure the same ones or the same manpower is there in those particular areas also. Am I saying that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the same manpower, they're visiting, they're out there walking the beat, as I call it, walking the community, walking the neighborhood, talking to our citizens, and they're making sure that we can continue to keep that continuity going between a police officer and neighborhoods or neighbors that live in neighborhoods. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They're out there. We have been hamstrung a little bit, like the rest of the entire world with this COVID. We don't get that face-to-face interaction as much as we were in some of the community meetings, but Cindy Sharp and her group is doing a good job of trying to stay in touch over the internet with folks and have virtual meetings with the neighborhoods. Of course, Robin and Everett is putting stuff out on social media almost daily of the interaction. There's always more we can market with this, but those guys and gals assigned to that unit in particularly have a huge amount of interaction with the public in all four corners of the city, and we can certainly step up the marketing in that.
Thank you very much, sir. I know that we will have some media certainly report out on some of those results, Commissioner Walker, which will be nice to have, tomorrow. But yes, we need to talk about the positive attainments. If it is a breaking point that's acceptable to you all, we're at 12:05, and that gives us time before our 1 o'clock meeting. If there are any other questions, I'm certainly willing to facilitate them. Seeing none, thank you very, very much, Chief Garcia and Assistant Chief Lehman for making this presentation and for all the prep work that's gone on behind it. It's very valuable. Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.